All right, well, welcome back, guys. Good to see you again. And we are going to be continuing the conversation that we've been in. That really, this is the third in a short little series we're doing about not only disciple making pathway and just the energy that seems to be around that idea for a lot of pastors and church leaders here in the last couple of years, or maybe intensified energy around that. But then specifically the role that calling and personal calling for each person within the congregation plays inside of a an effective disciple making pathway. So I would just encourage anybody who's watching this to go back and check out the first two parts of this conversation. But even if you haven't, I think this conversation, even by itself, could be, very, very helpful for you, and just how we think about and talk about this idea of calling. Because there's a lot of stuff that's been done in this, a lot of work and books and assessments, right, that are out there around this idea to say, how can we help people to discover how God has made them and what their calling is. And a lot of Christians have a sense that they are called to something, or they may have a general sense of that calling, but they don't have a specific understanding about what a calling would mean for them in like where they are right now. So as we're continuing that conversation, maybe Dave, I'll direct this first question to you. I think that we have, I know I've heard you guys talk about this before, that there are three different ways when we want to define a calling, or maybe how a calling functions, or our relationship to our calling. Three different ways that we talk about what calling can mean in someone's life. Do you want to just kind of walk through those?
Yeah, that'd be great. We can I'll just give a general overview and then we can dive into each piece of it. And I think the best way you phrase the conversation there is how do we relate to our calling
Mm.
is what this is answering. And this really comes to us from Derek Samford up at Grace Church in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I'm so thankful he brought us this idea because I think it just and is at the beginning of our calling process called Handcrafted, but it gives us three different lenses, and the three different lenses are that your calling is a gift, your calling is a responsibility, and your calling is an invitation. And It's actually important that people recognize all three of those things because if it becomes any two of those things, it puts you into some precarious positions as to how you relate to your calling. So we can dive into each one of those in particular because I think they're all really important, and we can talk about what happens when you only have two out of the three. We only think you're only relating in two out of the three ways, but Derek's work here has just been, I think, great in helping us think about how we relate to our calling.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good. Well, and I appreciate you mentioning Derek. Derek's fantastic guy, fantastic pastor. And he has a podcast too. What's the name of his podcast?
Reinventing church. Yeah.
Reinventing Church. Yeah. So anybody who's watching this, if you have not checked that out, that it's him kind of detailing their journey, right? Grace Church's journey through
Yeah.
implementing a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
that Clarity House processes and tools and that kind of thing. So yeah, let's talk about, like you said, Dave, the first one there, calling as a gift. And I don't know, Dave, if you want to kick off, or Shane, but how do you talk about that of calling is a gift?
I'll let Shane go here on first on this one, and then I'll jump
Sure.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the first thing we love to think about is a gift, and what we mean by that, or just what it helps to draw us to, is that God really values us.
Mm.
And it's different than the way that maybe I value my mechanic. Um, right. I value my mechanic because he has knowledge and capabilities to fix my truck that I don't have. But that's not the way God values us. He's all knowing. He's all powerful. He's not looking to me to fix something for him, right? In that, But as we often talk about with Ephesians 2:10, he says, Paul reminds us that we're God's workmanship, recreated in Christ Jesus to do good works He's prepared in advance for us to do. And it reminds us that both God has chosen us, but He's also deposited things in us that allows that calling to truly function as a gift. It's like this like we have special design and special work set aside. And I love the way Eugene Peterson talks about this when in his commentary out of Jeremiah, where, and of course in Jeremiah 1, it's talking about like before you were even born, I knew you and had prepared you for certain works that He's going to do. And Eugene Peterson describes it this way: he says, before Steve, you were good for anything, God already decided that you were good for what He was up to. Like He was already depositing and designing you in a way for the unique work that He had for you. So first thing we think about is your calling is really a gift.
And I want to jump in here too, Steve, and Ty. This is so significant to energy through the disciple making pathway. Um, what keeps people, in my opinion, one of the things that keeps people from moving from being discipled to becoming a disciple maker. So this is where oftentimes the pathway gets hung up.
Mhm.
Uh, I've found that oftentimes people don't disciple others because they don't really believe they have anything of value to bring to the table.
Mm.
And so, they feel the guilt that they should be discipling people, but they don't actually feel the freedom of, hey, you have value to bring to the table. And when you demonstrate that value in other people's lives, it returns to you as a disciple making opportunity.
Mhm.
And so if you don't know what value you bring to the table, it's going to be really hard to jumpstart you as a disciple maker because you don't think you have anything to give to anyone. And so, part of a calling process is really about helping people understand, like Shane was saying, before you were in existence, you were in God's imagination. He put you together with incredible workmanship. Like you're a masterpiece, a one of a kind design, and part of what it means to be human is to spend time diving in to the value that God has placed inside of you, and then being able to demonstrate that. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, there's a lot of people who do want to be discipled by me based out of the value that now I'm presenting because now I'm even aware of it myself. So this is directly related to the disciple making pathway, because if we're not doing that, if at best we are saying you're gifted to serve in our volunteer funnel, they're never going to become disciple makers. They'll help us carry out the work, quote unquote, of church, but they won't actually become people who are disciples that are discipling other people. And so that's why, calling is so important, because we do want people to not just be in our church and think they can help us do what we do, but now, we become the hero makers. We now say, hey, we're glad you're helping us right now, but there's some things in you that you may not even see in yourself. We want to help you discover those things and release you into those things so that our church's multiplication funnel is actually gaining some steam.
I think too, just that something you said there was important, Dave, is that calling, we're saying here, calling is a gift, which we would say in your calling, God is giving you spiritual gifts, but we're saying something more than that. We're actually saying your calling is a gift. We're not just limiting to the idea that we have spiritual gifts. And I think that's really what you're calling out here too. It's good.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you referenced the passage from Ephesians 2 about both of you did talking about that we're His workmanship, we are His masterpiece.
Yeah.
And I always so for me the idea of gift, you guys didn't ask me, but I'm going to share it anyway.
Yeah,
For me,
please.
the idea of calling as gift has two pieces to it, and this might come from some of my history and that kind of thing. But first is um, it's when we think of our calling as a gift, it's not out of pride, but it's actually out of humility, that it's not something that we generate ourselves. It's something that God has imparted to us. So we are not the source of it. So we
Yeah.
can feel free to say, this is a gift that I've been given. It's not like you're not trying to put yourself up on a pedestal. You're
Mhm.
saying, no, this is something that was given to me. I'm not the
Yeah.
source of it. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is thinking as an artist. And if you know me, you know I come from like that musical background.
Yeah.
Um, what makes something a masterpiece is that it was created by a master. So you can have like there are whether it's a work of art or whether it's music or a painting or whatever, you other people might look at it and say, I don't understand what makes this unique. And then it's like, well, but it was painted by Da Vinci. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, you know what I mean? So when you look at yourself and you say, what do I really have to offer? What you
Mhm.
have to offer is that you are a work of your Father God.
Mhm.
And so you offer what you offer, and it is a gift, and you are a
Mhm.
masterpiece, not even necessarily because of how awesome you are, but
Yeah.
because he was the one who created you.
Yeah.
So those things help me because, it's like, well, no, I don't want to put myself up on this. Right. Nope, that's not what this is about. This is about God's glory
Yeah.
and him imparting that to us as a gift. So good stuff. Now, what about responsibility? Calling
Yeah.
as responsibility.
Yeah, you're kind of you're even tapping into it a little bit there because there is this sense that, if our calling is not just a gift, but it then also is a responsibility, and it means that that God trusts you. Um, and we talk a lot about, trusting God for good reasons, right? But it also means that there's something being entrusted to us, and we have a responsibility, for that, and it's our unique part to play in God's story, and it's a unique role we have in His mission. And you were kind of, naming it there a little bit, Steve. Is I think I go to like John 15. Jesus says, "I no longer call you servants; I call you friends." Right? And he says in that it's because he's inviting us in essence to what he's up to, but he's actually entrusting something to us,
Mhm.
and what he's doing and what he's up to as well. And so in that it's I think about this, um the my role as a parent, for instance, um is a responsibility, which means it has several things that are part of that. I mean, it's a combination of both delight and duty, right? It's whole.
Yeah.
There's holy pride in being a dad, and there's pain, in it. There's
Yeah.
significance to it, and there's like extraordinary amount of sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I think that's true about our callings as well. Is that when we think about it being a responsibility, is that there's both this delight in it and duty in it. Like there's something that we're carrying that we have in some ways, a graceful obligation, a grace-filled obligation to then say, all right, how do we play our part?
Yeah, this again goes back to the disciple making pathway, and it's really this move from disciple to leader as part of that. And one of the things we talk about that the primary question in discipleship is, can I trust God? And I grow as a disciple every time that I hear God's voice and trust God's heart enough to act on what He's told me to do. So that's the
Hmm.
whole battleground. I mean, our friends at Soma talk about discipleship as the movement from unbelief to belief in every area of life. And that hinge kind of question is, can I trust God? And that's, so much of what we continue to battle with as disciples of Jesus. But when we get into leadership, the question changes from can I trust God to can God trust me? And, how now am I living my life out in a way that lives up to the trust that God puts in me? And this is important because what this reminds us of is God is in a trusting posture toward his people.
Mhm.
Like we don't have to like earn something. Like he
Right.
he initiates trust, but the responsibility piece of it is living up to the trust that he's put inside of us. And we should feel the weight of that in a healthy way, that the creator of the universe, has trusted us and trusted us in some pretty significant ways. And that that is a standard to live up to. It like it calls the best out of us, and it calls us from deteriorating into the worst of ourselves. And so we don't want to hear this, as an overwhelming kind of burden, but we do want to hear it as a holy obligation to say, if the creator of the universe has signed his name, I love the way you talked about that, Steve. He signed his name on us.
Yep.
So he signed his name on us, that comes with a certain level of responsibility. That's part of that.
Yeah, yep. That's really good. I love that. I also think about in the life of Jesus, and to me this goes back to, the and I my kids get tired of me saying this to them over and over, like the whole if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm like, actually, I have not found that to be true. That
Yeah.
when you love something, you'll work harder at it. You'll put blood,
Yeah.
sweat, and tears into it. And I think we talked about that, right? But I also think about, like, if you think about Jesus and his understanding of his calling, and how it came to a point in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? As he's on the verge of fulfilling this huge part, not the only part, but a
Yeah.
huge part of his calling. And he's like, do I really have to do this?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
do I have, and so there is a part of it that for us, and I think I'm fine saying for like an Americanized version of Christianity, we want to avoid this kind of, like, well, Shane, you even talked about pain in being a parent, right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
there is going to be a pain and a struggle
Yeah.
and a sacrifice when we truly live into and out of the calling that God has for us. And that doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? That could actually mean that we're right where we're supposed to be.
Right.
What you
Yeah.
so yeah, I love what you're saying of even balancing those, right? Of the
Yeah.
delight of, wow, this is a gift that God's given me. I'm so grateful for it. And a responsibility of, but do I really have to? Like,
Yeah.
that tension is fine
Yeah.
and is
Yeah.
something to lean into rather than avoid.
Yeah.
So that
And
then the
which really clicks into, Steve, I think I mean, even when you say avoid like that, like into
yeah,
the third part of it, because so far what we've said, right, is your calling's a gift that can either, we can value or devalue. Like we have a
right.
choice in that we can value or devalue even the gift. It's a responsibility that we can either steward or squander, but it
Hmm.
is also an invitation, which you can accept
Yes.
or reject, you
Hmm.
know? And
Yeah.
so the way we describe it is that it means that God includes you. When we say your calling is also an invitation, it's that He includes you. And when when you think about you've been invited to a wedding or a birthday party, or a child's baptism or a person's baptism, whatever else. Any invitation is always based on relationship.
Hmm.
And it means that your presence is requested, like, but it's not necessarily required, right?
Hmm.
And so the
Yeah.
event will go on with or without you.
Yeah.
And really, when you think about your calling and seeing it in that way too, that it's an invitation that you get a chance to participate in what God's up to, and He's inviting us, but He's not forcing us in that. And it really becomes this really beautiful invitation to, in some ways, co-create with Him and join
Mhm.
Him in what He's up to, and we get a part to play in that. And I like to think about that invitation is, we don't want to miss, I don't want to miss out on the adventure that God is bringing my way or our way, as we think about our calling, and really even seeing our calling. That invitation is an invitation into participation and cooperation with Him. And it's also an invitation into adventure with Him.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, I remember years ago I was studying for a sermon and I came across this idea in Jewish theology that they talk about as the theology of participation. I
Mm.
don't remember my source on this, so I don't know how to give credit to it, but I do remember the idea because it never left me.
Mm.
And the theology of participation in Jewish theology basically said this. Um, God, it says this, God will not do what you can do. God will work in you and through you, but not instead of you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I love the way that, as you continue to read on this, the
Hmm.
way that this works with God's sovereignty, God's going to accomplish his purposes,
Yep.
but he will wait on his participants,
Hmm.
meaning that the purposes of God happening in the world are not in jeopardy. However, God is incredibly patient and he will wait for someone who will join him in his work. He won't work instead of us. He'll work through us, he'll work in us, but not instead of us. And, there's this sense that this is a great invitation. It's God's purposes are not in jeopardy, whether we take it or not. But for the people that are in our lives, it
Hmm.
requires us to participate with him on that. And so, that Esther language of for such a time as this, God will send his deliverance through another person, but who knows that you
Yeah.
have come to the throne for such a time as this. And
Hmm.
so I love the way that the theologian talked about that in Jewish theology. God will not work instead of you. He'll work in you and through you, but not instead of you. God's work, and the way I kind of coined the phrase based off of that is God's heart for a nation always runs through the heart of a person.
Hmm.
God's heart for your community always runs through the heart of a person, and he will wait until someone will respond to that invitation for his heart to be poured out in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, it's good. I think it goes back to what you guys were saying before of that God entrusts that to us, right? To human beings, to be, yeah, to work
And,
through it. So it's
and
powerful.
that's as old as Genesis chapter 2,
Right.
where God invites Adam and Eve to name the animals and to tend for the garden. And it's really important that that the tending is actually a priestly term there. Like it's the same kind of work that the priests would do in the temple. And this sense of naming is this sense of ruling and reigning in a healthy, empowering way, not overpowering. And right from the beginning, before there's any sin in the world, God is involving humanity in his creative work.
Yeah.
And that is actually part of what it means to be human. Someone once said, when you deprive someone of work, you deprive them of their humanity
Hmm.
because it's so tied to who we are. And from the beginning, God is saying, I can name the animals better than you, but I choose to do it through you, right? I can tend the garden better than you, but I choose to do it through you. And that's something that's different. It separates us as humans from other parts of creation. And it is, I think, an important part of us reclaiming our humanity post fall, so to speak, is to say there is holy work for you to do that you have actually been designed to accomplish.
That's good. So how do these three ideas, gift, responsibility, and invitation, these three ways that we relate to our calling, what are some ways that those can be kind of woven into or inform that disciple making pathway or that spiritual growth pathway?
Yeah, I think part of that, Steve, is to say what happens when we, embrace two of these things, but not the third. So, one of the ways we talk about that, and Derek talks about this. So, like, I just want to continue to make sure we give Derek credit on this. That if you see your calling as a gift and an invitation, but not a responsibility, then you probably are looking at your calling as a hobby.
Huh.
It's something that I can get
Get
to.
around to it.
Yeah, when I have some extra time,
Mhm.
but it's not actually forcing its way into my life unless if I've got some extra time to be able to do it, then I enjoy doing it, but it's not actually intruding on my life in any kind of way. It's just a hobby, and so I play at it, but I don't actually work it into the way I do my entire life.
Yeah, that's good. And how about like if you lose the gift part of that and you have just the responsibility and invitation?
Burden.
Yeah, yeah.
like it becomes a burden, right? I
Yeah,
mean, just think
right.
about that. If I no longer see it as a gift and it is only a responsibility and invitation, I carry it
Yeah,
as a burden of something not that I get to do,
yeah,
but it's something I have to do.
yeah,
And you just think about, we know even in this, a lot of people who are going to be listening to this or, read the
yeah.
around this will be, vocational ministry leaders. How many would say that over time their calling has started to feel like a burden on that? And so really wanting to make sure that we're always awakening the fact that this really is a gift. Like it actually generates the joy even in the pain,
Right.
of that responsibility or in the pain of the invitation at times, that it always is refueling the joy of of the gift that it really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with that, remember Jesus's words are, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." And how many of us have read that and said, Jesus, you're a liar, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Not my
So this,
experience,
right,
Jesus.
right.
Right.
But what that could signify in our lives is that we've lost calling as a gift.
Mm,
Like when the burden becomes breaking
yeah.
to us and when it becomes paralyzing to us, then maybe a good place to return to is, hey, I need to remember that calling is a gift. And maybe that's an invitation of Jesus to come rest with him and to relearn again about the gift of the calling that he's placed on us.
Yeah. That's good. And what about the invitation when the invitation is missing and you just have the gift
You were
responsibility?
naming it a moment ago.
Mm,
Is that it becomes self-serving?
yeah. Got
Like
it.
we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
realize that we're when we lose the sight that we're cooperating out of communion
Hmm.
with the master
Yeah.
who doesn't need us but is choosing to invite us into what he's doing.
Mm,
It suddenly can shift to be, I'm using my calling now for me
yeah.
rather than for the good of others and for the glory of God.
And the key indicator there, Steve, is when my calling doesn't lead to mission. And here's what I mean by that. Remember, in our last episode, we talked about defining those terms.
Yeah.
Calling is what I do, mission is what we do.
Mm,
So if ever our calling becomes something that we are doing by ourselves, we probably have lost the responsibility that our calling functions in a bigger mission of what we are doing together. And that we is first, the local church, like the local church in the community. How is my calling, helping the church better accomplish its mission? Because every time my calling combines with Shane's calling or your calling, we need a greater mission than any one of our callings. And so what happens when calling gets detached from we and it's just
mhm.
then I use it as an excuse to do everything that I want to do. I love the way Will Willimon um, talks about, sometimes where we get to in Christianity, and he says, God basically becomes someone to give me everything I ever wanted before I met God. And I like,
Right.
times have I tried to use God to give me everything I ever wanted before I met God. The we nature of mission keeps me from abusing God in that way because it's not just simply about God being a genie in a bottle that gives me everything I ever wanted before him, and calling then is my excuse to pursue that. No, if calling doesn't lead to if personal calling doesn't lead to then most likely it's gotten off track and it's become self-serving to me.
Yeah. That's good. Any final thoughts? I know we need to wrap
Yeah.
up, but any final thoughts for pastors and church leaders about this?
Well, just to go back to your question too, then how does this play into the pathway side of
Yeah.
things? It is
Right.
awakening those three things and really grounding in those three things as our calling being a gift and invitation responsibility that activates intrinsic motivation by the Spirit for the life that got. So we're not suddenly now going, hey, we're trying to convince people how to just simply discern their gifting so they can serve within,
Right.
our vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, people, we have a vision and you can help us, and God's gifted you to help us. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, to really motivate that and awaken that intrinsic motivation, that invites them into, it may very well serve inside the organized ministry of the church in which to live. That is one of the vehicles in which to live out my calling, and or into the places where I live, work, and play, which I think then gets us to the true meaning of the Latin word from that we get calling is really the word, where we get vocation,
Right.
on that, and it's true vocation, not just my 9 to 5, but it's true
Mm-hmm.
seeing I have a calling to carry. I have a calling that I'm stewarding, and bringing that into how that may play out into the actual organization of the church, but also as empowering the organism of the church into all of life.
And we just had this conversation. We had about 21 people for our certification for Funnel Fusion
Mm-hmm.
this past week that we were talking with. And when you're starting to put together the pathway, you're always saying, how many time slots do people have? Will they give us 1 hour? Will they give us 2 hours? Will they give us 3 hours? Well, when you activate calling, you reset the time clock in people's lives. So if
Hmm.
you're just doing gifting, yeah, I've only got 1 or 2 hours, but it's remarkable what people will do out of their calling. They will release all kinds of new hours to fulfill
Hmm.
their calling. They'll start organizations. They'll give, I mean, because what Shane's talking about here is it's intrinsic motivation that no longer do I feel a duty or obligation to serve an institution of some kind. I feel the freedom and opportunity of stepping into who God's called me to be. So on the disciple making pathway, if you want to reset the time clock in people's minds, you have to engage personal calling, or else you're going to be trying to do the church on only 1 or 2 hours of people's time a week. Well, the mission of the church is way too big to accomplish on 1 or 2 hours of most people's time. We've got to get into that other clock. And that happens as we ignite personal calling in people's lives. They'll do all kinds of things that we ask them to, and all kinds of things that we never ask them to. And they start living that out.
Awesome. So good. Well, thanks, you guys. As always, love these conversations. Obviously, we're going to be coming back to this idea of calling, I know, many times in the future, because it's something that is so important, as we've been saying, in that whole disciple making culture, disciple making pathway conversation. So, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
You
Thank
bet.
you.